The banded hip flexor, we're going to use a band to create a band distraction, which is going to create a bit of extra space in the hip socket. And we're also going to work on our range of motion and flexibility through the hip flexor muscles. Now, the hip flexor muscles are particularly an area that I see a lot of issues with athletes. A lot of athletes struggle for hip extension range of motion. Now, what I'm talking about when I refer to hip extension range of motion is this action here, where the hip is creating extension. And one of the reasons that we see a lot of issues here is that many athletes don't have adequate range of motion, which leads to compensation. And athletes will they'll perform anterior pelvic tilt to create an artificial increase in that extension range of motion, which leads to a jamming up of the lumbar spine. And when we've got an athlete who's running and they do this, it also means that they lose access to hip flexion. So if you can imagine, by turning my pelvis forward, I then create like a block for the opposite knee, and I can't then get good hip flexion to get that leg cocked up nice and high, which then allows me to be more efficient and effective in my running. So that hip extension range of motion is a really important thing for athletes to have adequate amounts of. Now, to perform this particular exercise, you just need a resistance band. You can anchor it on anything you want. What you're going to do is loop the band up and under into one leg, just below the insertion of the hamstring on the back of the thigh here. You're going to jump into a half kneeling position, and that band is obviously pulling forward on your thigh. What you're going to do from here, squeeze the glute, and then with the same leg hand, we're going to reach up, back and across. All right. When we're performing this, really important that we're not arching through our lumbar spine. We're neutralizing that pelvis. Think of the pelvis as a bucket of water. We don't want that bucket of water to tip forward and let any water spill out. We want to keep it level. All right. Squeeze the glute, reach up, back and across, and you'll feel a bit of a stretch through here. Now, with this exercise, I'll typically perform 2 sets. The first set will be an anterior or forwards distraction, which is what we've just seen there. And set number 2, I'll do a lateral distraction. So for this one, I'll show you now on the opposite leg, but it's now a side-on pulling force. And instead of pulling that thigh bone, the femur, forward in the hip socket, which is what we did with the anterior distraction, now we're creating some lateral space and pulling the femur to the side. Exactly the same setup. Neutralize the pelvis, squeeze the glute, all right, reach up, back, and across, finding that stretch through here again. All right, and in between those reps, after the glute squeeze, I also want a relaxation phase as well. So after we perform this, we relax and let that band tension create some displacement for the hip socket. And that's the band hip flexor exercise.